So since we had published an article using electrochemistry, analyzing for iodine, I called them up and wanted to know if they had any equipment that they could loan us for us to set up a lab so we could do this testing. Well, sure, since they had sold a lot of equipment based on our article, our research journal. So they went out and delivered us one of their beautiful computerized polarographs, is what they're called. And they're ultra sensitive to most electroactive chemicals. So I have been used to analyzing for lead and a whole lot of toxic heavy metals as a part of the course of my work at Wyeth Laboratories. We made infant formula, so we wanted to make sure that our customers were not being fed lead, which would damage the infants who we were selling our product to. So I had a lot of experience in that. And I'll give you a little sidelight. What made my career at Wyeth was some idiot doctor had published an article in one of the pediatric journals accusing the infant formula companies of poisoning the babies with lead. And so not only my company, but all the other companies in the industry were just terrified. It came out of the Albert Einstein School of Medicine, so it had a lot of cachet just by where this article came from. Turns out he didn't know what he was doing, but nobody else, the data showed that nobody else, well, it could be possible, but we who had been doing research in that field, I had already had information that showed that he reported values for lead that were well over 100, in most cases 1,000 times of what they actually were. And by electrochemistry, we were able to show that the actual content of milk in our supplies, in our product, were down in the low parts per billion, not in parts per million. The equipment he used, he didn't know how to run it. He didn't know how to isolate ultra micro quantities of lead, so his values were all wrong. And he just accepted what the salesman that sold him the instrument told him how to run it. And so they were all wrong. So the company, my company as well as a lot of other ones, threw a lot of money in it. I was able to hire technicians. They threw money at me. I was able to buy equipment and set up research. So that's partly how I got to know this professor of dairy nutrition, and we became good friends. So when they brought the equipment out, we set up a laboratory in my basement. Well, we tested for all of the metal toxic logical ones of lead, cadmium, thallium, kinds of elements that are toxic that had any chance of being included. The samples that he got were of animal parts. So the bones and teeth that he took, we put in a muffle furnace that gets up to about 500 degrees Celsius, or roughly 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that burns out the carbon, and you can crush and grind the bone fragments that you've put in the furnace into powder, and then you can analyze it. You can dissolve it with acids or bases or chemicals that we use in the laboratory. So we were able to test for a wide variety of possible elements, including things like copper is normally a required element. We need that in our body. But in some cases it can accumulate higher levels that are damaging. And lots of elements are the same way. And none of them were excessive. So we knew it was none of those. So we got together, once we had done all of that research, we went and met at a bar and drank a bunch of beer and decided we had to test for less obvious elements. And of course, some of those would be like fluorine and other elements that could get in food or into animal feed by various means. Well, the very first, we checked for iodine, of course, we had already done that research, and it was normal. So we tested for all of the halogens, which is a family of elements that are directly below chlorine or above.
It's the 18th row or column on the periodic table, right?
Yes. So fluorine is lighter than chlorine, but it's in the same family of elements. It's a lot different, but at any rate, we tested a few of the bones, fragments, and the samples that we made up to start with were small segments out of lots of animals that had died or been killed for testing purposes. And so we mixed small quantities together so we could test a large pool of animals. If their one was very high in something and it was in a pool, we could test for a lot of animals to see if any were outstanding. Well, the first sample we did with fluorine was way out of sight. All of those animals basically had to be contaminated. We did not have any equipment to test for PBB. So what we did is he went back to those dairy farms and got samples of tissue, and he sent those to a laboratory in Wisconsin, a commercial laboratory to test for PBB. So while that was going on, we were doing individual samples of individual animals. Instead of putting the samples all together, we tested individuals. virtually all quite high, coming from that same pool of animals in the thumb. Now, it sounds simple, but some of those in the thumb area of Michigan, there are areas where fluoride is quite high naturally. But the farmers had learned to get around that problem by having water either piped in or trucked in to their animals. So they could be sitting on high fluoride water, but the humans there and the animals were not exposed to it because they used water that had been trucked in or piped in. But in spite of that, these animals were still sky high in fluoride. So we had to really double back and make sure our equipment was not contaminated. We had to make sure that we could get, and this is where the Amish came in. Don was able to get samples from them, and their fluoride content was almost zero. In fact, it was so low, it was not healthy for the animals, because without any fluoride, the teeth decay.